talk to him about different things. Anyway, all right, so today, Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 1, and I'll tell you when we jump to the next place. Mark chapter 14, verse 1. It was now 2 days before Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. Verse 22. As they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. And he said, "Take, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of heaven." Next verse is verse 32 to 42. "And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I pray.' And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch.' And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and he prayed, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, 'Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will.' And he came and found them sleeping. And he said, 'Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.' And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came a third time and said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand.'" Verse 43. "And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs, and the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard.' And when he came, he went up to him and at once said, 'Rabbi,' and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew a sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them," oops, I went too far. Stop. Next. 53, verse 53. "And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all of the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. And now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, 'We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst of and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer to make? But what is it that these men testify against you?' But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Christ?' the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments, and he said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with the Nazarene, Jesus, but he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And when he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed, and the servant girl saw him, and began again to say to the bystanders, this man is one of them. But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. This is the word of the Lord. People are unreliable. This entire chapter essentially is the kicking off point of, and when I say it's kicking it off, it began before this, but this is Jesus' process to the cross, where he, as the son of the man with the vineyard, is coming in, and the people that were the tenants of the vineyard in chapter 12, in the parable of the tenants, where they are going to take the heir, and they say, come, let us kill him. The parable is becoming truth in this passage. The inheritance will be ours. And they took him and they killed him in the passage, and they threw him out in the vineyard. And now in chapter 14, the son is coming. The son is here, and the son is going to be killed. And really, chapter 14 is long. It's 72 verses. Like we had, last week we had Kevin Orrick read chapter 13, and he has a professional voice, right? Everyone who talked to me after the service, they were like, who is that read? It was incredible. It's Kevin Orrick. He's not here today. But, man, that down into what the Lord would have for us today. But ultimately, what we see in the entirety of this passage is this. We see the failure of humanity and the faithfulness of the Messiah. It's that simple. The failure of humanity and the faithfulness of the Messiah, because in the midst of betrayal and suffering and abandonment, Jesus is steadfast in his purpose the whole way. There is no wavering. What happens to all the other people? They're gone. So we're going to start there. So get ready. The first half, super encouraging. Second half, a little more encouraging. The first third, not encouraging. Second third, encouraging. Hopefully the third is really encouraging. So the first thing we have to see is the failure of humanity in this whole passage, because in truth, all of Mark chapter 14, it starts out with the failure of humanity, and we have seen that actually throughout the entirety of the Gospel of Mark when it speaks intentionally to the religious leaders of the day. Because what is wrong with the religious leaders of the day? They're completely blind to the work of God. They're completely blind to the work of God. And we've seen this growing tension between Jesus and these people, these religious leaders, from Mark chapter 2 all the way to this time where we come to Mark chapter 14, where they're going to execute on what they promised in Mark chapter 3, saying this: the Pharisees went out immediately, held counsel with the Herodians against him on what? How to destroy him. It's coming to fruition here in this moment. And they wanted to destroy him for many reasons. Why? Because number one, Jesus wanted to, he said he could forgive sin. There's no one that can forgive sin but God himself. But the problem is the religious leaders were blind to who Jesus was. They could not see God right in front of them. Throughout Mark, you see this reality of what Jesus works and does through his miraculous, when you want to say powers, but it's the essence of who he is being God. You see basically the renewal of all creation through him. And so you see sickness turned upside down and turned to health. You see someone who is lame be able to walk. You see someone blind can see. You see someone dead living. But they can't see it, and it infuriates them because it honestly, at some point, it's going to take away the power that they have because he is displaying something otherworldly they don't understand. And so here in this passage, it comes to its climax where it says it's 2 days before Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes are seeking how to arrest him. And how are they doing it? I love it. By stealth and kill him is what they want to do. They want to do it sneakily, but here's the thing, that there's another part of this that it says next. But they don't want to do it during the feast because they're afraid of an uproar from the people. They can't understand who Jesus is. They can't see him for what he does or what he says or what he teaches. So death is his only appropriate action. They can't understand. But here's the beauty of the Bible. Like, his enemies aren't the only ones that can't see Jesus. Even his guys, the disciples, can't completely understand what is going on, despite Jesus telling them over and over and over again in the next passage, or in the next section of this passage, where Jesus is anointed at Bethany, and he's sitting at the house of Simon the leper, and a woman comes in with an alabaster flask of ointment. And think of it more like oil. She comes in with this flask, she breaks it, and she pours it all over him, and they're like, "What are you doing? You just threw thousands of dollars all over this man, all over the floor." And then they play the righteous position. You could have fed the poor with that, right? It's like virtue signaling. There you go, use the modern word. They start, you could have poured that, but what Jesus says, no. She did the right thing. You still don't, despite the fact that you've walked with me for 3 years, you still can't see who I am. You still don't understand. I've done miracle after miracle after miracle, and I've told you 3 times up to this point that I would go to the cross and die for your sin. But you still don't get it. You still don't see it. They are yet blind to who this Jesus is. And the interesting thing, and I'm going to bring this up really fast, I'm not going to preach about it. What's crazy is that there's one other person that doesn't really fail in this, and it's this woman. All the disciples fail, all the religious leaders, but this woman doesn't fail, by the way. She's the one that worships Jesus rightly. You should go back and read it. It's a fantastic story. But like all these other people, they fail because they're completely blind to who Jesus is. They can't see him for what he has done. They don't understand the big picture of who God is because generally we get caught up in ourselves and our lives and our worlds, and we can't see the big picture of what God is doing. And guess what? We all do that. Like, so for instance, these are all examples. If you didn't know, when people give examples when they're preaching or telling a story or something, it's because that's what they struggle with. So here's my example. People can, if you're bitter, if you're constantly frustrated, if you're constantly a pessimist, you know why you're like that? Because you can't see and you're blind to what God's doing around you. Because you're so focused on what's happening to you and for you and through you and all that kind of stuff, you can't even see the minor details of what God might miraculously be working around you at all times, and you're just completely blind to it, and you miss what God is doing. And so you just get bitter and frustrated and angry. No, open your eyes. God's at work everywhere. if only we would see it. But it's not just that they fail in that way, but also there's a failure in many different things. And this is a specific one that is stated in this passage in verse 15:2 or 14:2, where I said just like a few minutes ago, the chief priests, they're seeking to kill Jesus, but they don't want to do it because there might be an uproar from the people. Who are the religious people fearing in this moment? The people. They're afraid of what the people might do. They're like, we want to kill Jesus. And so, like, the second way they fail is they fear men. They don't fear God, they actually fear men. And so not only do they want to kill Jesus because they want to keep their own authority, their own religious authority, but they also don't want to kill Jesus here in this moment. They want to wait for a second because they're afraid of what the people might do to them. Do you know the disciples are actually no different in very many ways in this passage to what the religious leaders are? Why? Because if you think back to Peter himself, he is sitting around a campfire after Jesus gets arrested and after he goes through his trial, and this little servant girl, the lowest of low, the lowest on the social totem pole. I just kind of think as my daughter, a 7-year-old, coming up to the Apostle Peter and being like, "Hi, Peter, aren't you following Jesus?" And he's so afraid to answer and what they might think or what they might do to him, he's like, "No." To a little girl. And it's nothing to do with that she's a little girl, by the way. It's that she is the lowest on society's totem pole, and he's more afraid of her and of them than she is of God Almighty. We're the same, right? The whole point is not like, when we work through these things, when we work through passages like this, it's really easy to go, gosh, what's wrong with them? If I was them, I would figure this out. I would be the righteous one. I would be the woman with the ointment, breaking it, doing the proper sacrifice. No, you wouldn't. It's just like I've heard, there's Instagram stories of somebody, I get a lot of material from Instagram. There's an Instagram story of like somebody having a conversation about, hey, if I lived in Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s, there's no way I would have been one of them. The answer is you probably would have. Because that's how it works. Like, you aren't just the strongest, the best, the most morally upright. Yet more often than not, you follow along with the crowd because we are afraid of what men might do or men might think or men might say. And so they were afraid of men, but then you keep going and all we see is the next thing, which are Jesus is constantly betrayed and abandoned by people. Like, again, the whole story is of men's abandonment and Jesus is steadfast. In verse 10, it talks about Judas betraying Jesus. Judas is one of the 12, and it says that intentionally because it wants us to recognize that intimate relationship that Jesus has with his disciples. He's one of the 12. What have these 12 been doing for the last 3 years since Jesus called each of them by name to follow him? They've been with him. They haven't left his side. They've been literally walking next to Christ. And yet, Jesus, what does Judas do? You know what? If I can get some silver, I'm going to betray you. And again, what do? I would never do what Judas did. But like, how many of us, for the sake of funds, have like done something we know we probably shouldn't do? Has anybody like skirted on their taxes just by a little bit? Or like, have you taken some business things from your office? And again, that's not directly betraying Jesus, but what you're doing in that moment is you're saying, you know what, I'm going to take something that I don't have because I covet it, and so in a sense you betray God because you're sinning. So while you're not directly betraying Jesus, you are. And so like, the betrayal of Judas, we see it and we go, I would never be Judas. Like, we are all in our own ways. He did it for the money. He sought an opportunity after that. And they come later with weapons ready. In fact, Mark 14:44, it says, "Now the betrayer had given them a sign. The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And the next verse, "When he came, he went up to him at once and he said, 'Rabbi,' and he kissed him." Our phrase, have you ever heard the phrase kiss of death? Kiss of death comes from this. There's an intimacy with something that causes destruction, and Judas fails and betrays Jesus, and he does it in an intimate way that it even fulfills Psalm 41 verse 9, where it says, "Even my close friends in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, who has lifted his heel against me." His heel was lifted and Jesus was kissed in the moment, and he was betrayed and abandoned by his people. And even later we have this abandonment in verse 27 where it says, "And Jesus said to them, 'You will all fall away.'" Talking to the disciples. "You will all fall away. I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." Again, they've walked with Jesus for 3 years. They've seen him do all these things. But at the sign of what he has already predicted that is about to come to fruition, they're out. And again, we all want to be like, "No, man, I would stick with Jesus to the end." Well, there's actually a guy that tried in this passage. It says it's a young man. And he follows Jesus wearing a linen cloth. But as soon as they saw him, they attempted to grab him and take him away. And what ends up happening? He loses his cloth and runs away naked. And so even the guy that kind of tries, at the very end, he can't even go. He gets out of there. And what's unique about this situation is Mark is trying to symbolize something for us, because throughout the Bible, the reality of nakedness represents shame. If you think back to the Garden of Eden, in the garden, when man sins against God by eating of the fruit, their eyes are opened and they see that they're naked and they wanted to hide. When we experience shame, we want to hide, we want to run, we don't want anyone to see. And so this young man is, in a sense, he gets caught and the tunic or whatever he's wearing gets pulled off of him. And so he's running naked through the streets because he wants to get away from the thing that causes him shame, that's going to basically create and have him be captured. He abandons Jesus for the sake of his life. And then we've talked about Peter. Peter abandons Jesus through his words after Jesus predicts that he would, that he knew the rooster would, that he would in a sense deny Jesus. And when the rooster would crow, he would recognize that he had run away. Even in the garden, we see the disciples, the three that were the closest to Jesus, they go into the garden with him where he's in the midst of despair, and they go to the place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Just sit here while I pray. Just hang out here. It'll be okay. I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to pray a little bit, and I'm going to come back." They couldn't even stay awake. "Watch and pray that you might not enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." And every person in this story, whether an enemy or a friend, is unable to fulfill their obligation to Jesus. Over and over and over and over again. How many of you are just going, "This is the most encouraging passage of Scripture ever"? And again, here's the deal. All these people, I'm going to say this, they're the worst. And we just want to be, and in our hearts, because we want to be righteous, we want to go, "I would never do that." On some level, we have all done these things in our own special ways. We try and tell ourselves, "Oh, they're different, it's not the same." Categorically it is. Maybe in exact action it's not, because you don't live in Bible times, you're not walking around with Jesus. But we all abandon Jesus in our own unique way. We all do these things, but that is exactly the reason why Christ came to die. Because there is only one person in this story that was actually faithful to the purposes to which he was called. And it is Jesus himself, because now we have to recognize as we read this passage and as we live life in this world that failure is ultimately the way of men. And so our hope can't be there, but it has to be in the faithful Messiah. It has to be in the faithful Messiah. Number 2 is the faithfulness of the Messiah. We see in his faithfulness, his steadfastness through all different kinds of trials, in his suffering, first of all. In Mark 14, verse 33 to 35, they enter into the Garden of Gethsemane, and he took Peter and James and John, his 3, besties. Jesus spends more intimate time with Peter, James, and John than anybody else. And what happens? He began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." I don't know about you, but when I am stressed out, there are things that I want to go to that I know are going to make me feel better. I don't know about you, but most of the time, that's the first place I go. Where is the first place, however, that we should go when we feel suffering and pain and struggle? To the Lord. Because he's the only one that can actually truly comfort you and actually has power over any situation that you're in. Jesus does that. He is faithful to God in the moment despite all that he knows is coming. And he just says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." That's how bad. Even to death. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. That's real pain. The God-man who knew what had to be done, who was willingly walking the road of suffering. He was steadfast that despite all of the pain and the anguish that he knew was coming, that he was even experiencing very right then in the moment, he said, "Hey, I want this hour to pass from me, but what? It's not my will, but it's your will be done." It's your will be done. And it's through this that Jesus would bear the weight of sin and the wrath of God. But the suffering here, it wasn't just in the garden, and it was not just this mental, emotional, and spiritual reality, but his pain and his suffering in this passage was also physical too, and yet he persevered. He was steadfast in what God had called him to do and to be. Verse 64 and 65. "You have heard his blasphemy." This is in his trial. "What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. And what did they do? They began to spit on him, to cover his face, and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. That doesn't mean he got to inflict the blows, but he had the blows inflicted on him. The very people whose saliva glands that he created are now beating the creator of the universe. But what does Jesus do? He is steadfast. He knows. It's easy to say he didn't care. No, he cared, and he felt it deeply, and yet his purpose was steadfast. He was unmovable because the glory of God and faithfulness to his Father were far more important than his momentary relaxation, lack of pain, relief. But it wasn't just suffering, but in that suffering, he was also abandoned. Think about all the people that abandoned him. Judas betrayed him. Peter and the disciples scattered and denied him. This man was alone. Have you ever been alone? What's funny is we are as connected as we have ever been, and yet we are more alone than ever. And I would submit to you that actually, I don't remember who I was talking to. We were talking this week about small groups. We were having lunch. Lenny Parlow. Sorry. Lenny Parlow and I were having lunch, and we're talking about small groups. And, like, what's interesting is since COVID, like, our desire to actually be together as people has, like, disintegrated on some level. We, like, got used to being our little I was going to say holy huddles, but it's more like familial huddles. It's just more comfortable than being with a group of people that it's like, you've got a different opinion, you've got a different opinion, I've got all these opinions coming in, I'd rather just, like, be by myself. Which, by the way, as an introvert, I totally get. I love it. Being alone is the best. But that's not what's best for us, right? Jesus was all alone. And it wasn't like a willfulness, but it was alone because he was abandoned and everybody ran away. But Jesus doesn't like go running after it, searching or trying to create some manufactured community or whatever. He owns the abandonment, knows that this is the road that he has to walk down, the purpose that the Father has for him, that he would suffer and die for the sin of people. He alone could stand alone. And it was through his sacrifice of being abandoned that God's purposes would be accomplished. And next we see his steadfastness and his obedience. In fact, we've already touched on it a little bit. In verse 35 through 36, it says, and going a little farther, he fell on the ground and he prayed, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he prayed the same thing a couple times. In verse 41 and 42, he knows what's coming. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. R.T. France, he says that in Gethsemane, we see not only Jesus' horror at what lies ahead, but also the depth of his obedient submission. It's not a resignation to fate, but a choice of faithfulness to the Father's will. Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Let the scriptures be fulfilled, he says, because the will of God, the glory of God is what is most important to him. He could have run away. He could have used the power of his godness to escape or stop or whatever he wanted, but he knew what he had to do, and for the joy set before him, he endured the cross for the intention and the glory of his name and of the Father's. Finally, he is steadfast in knowing that he is ultimately the sacrifice that we've been talking about. In the midst of the passage during the Passover, we see them eating together, and Jesus tells them that one of them will betray him. And the interesting question, I love it because it's like, anyway, this is the question they ask him. Is it me? They're like, hey, who's going to betray? Jesus is like, one of you is going to betray me. Is it me? It's interesting that they immediately like turn it on themselves. Isn't that the nature of man? It's all about them. Well, it can't be me. No way. Not like worried at all about Jesus is about to die and be betrayed. Notice that? Well, not me. Couldn't be me. No way. It's a very selfish question, but the beauty of the gospel is this. Not that they asked the question, and it doesn't even matter who betrayed him, but it's in this moment that God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, like them, making it about themselves, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Verse 22 to 24, and it says, and they were eating, and he took the bread, and after blessing, and so remember, they're sitting down for the Passover, and he institutes the Lord's Supper, which we're going to spend all next week talking about the Lord's Supper. So if you have questions, email me, Jimmy, firstbaptistdurango.org, and maybe I'll answer some of them about Lord's Supper, why we do it every week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But with that in mind, they're sitting down for the Passover meal, all of them, Jesus knowing that one of them would betray him, and they sit down, and he takes the bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to them, and he said, take, this is my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all of them, drank of it. Even Judas, even the people that would fail. All of them drank it, and he said, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." The climax of this meal is one that shows the relationship created by blood, his blood, to unite God and his people. Throughout the Old Testament scriptures, you actually see this recognition that the cup, like the symbol of the cup, shows basically what wrath is, the wrath of God specifically, where suffering and punishment would come. So wherever the cup was, it symbolized this kind of reality. But now, because of who Jesus is and the sacrifice that he is about to give of himself, it becomes not a symbol of wrath and of death, but a symbol of life. Because Jesus drank the cup of the wrath of God, so now he offers his blood in a cup that becomes the newness of life, because as the Old Testament says over and over, that the blood is the life of the creature, and now the blood of Jesus is the very life which he gives to his people, even the failures. Even the failures. And this blood is his very life, which he gives to you that believe in his name. And this blood is the promise to experience the reality of the new covenant that has come. And here, a new promise is made to them. A new covenant is born where the blood of the lamb that was slain will be drunk by his people, going to the very core of who they are to create life within them. Not just a sprinkling on them to say you are God's, like what happened in the Old Testament with Moses, but no, the very blood of his life would be theirs. And so he goes through all of this pain, all of the cross, the resurrection, to offer his body and his blood for the sins of people. He was the Passover lamb whose blood was poured out, and our failures became his. He is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, where his righteousness became ours. And that is where the hope is for us. Jesus is the steadfast Messiah because he is the covenant God of his people with the purpose to redeem a people for himself, and he would not waver. And so the gospel says this, that no matter who you are, no matter what you have done, when we put our faith in him, we are his, and life is ours in him. When you say and believe what he says to these people that are putting him in a trial, verse 61 and 62, they ask him, "Are you the Christ?" Which is the question we all have to answer, the Son of the Blessed. Did you know we all answer that question? Every one of us. Either yay or nay. There's not like a, well, kind of. It's a very black and white question. Yes, no. And Jesus said to them, I'm sorry, not are you. You're not the Christ. But is Jesus the Christ? And Jesus said to them, I am. And for them, that blew their minds. That upended their worlds, because the same name that Jesus, the same answer that Jesus gives here is the same response that God gives for his name at the burning bush when Moses comes up to the burning bush and goes, "Hey, what's your name?" And God responds like this, I am. Jesus says to them, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. He gives them that his name is the covenant name of God, that he is the true Messiah that they have been longing for, and not just a man, but the God-man who brings the kingdom of God, who comes to call, not to call the righteous, but sinners, who came to give his life as a ransom for many, who says that this is the blood of the covenant which is poured out for many, who is the one who saves people from their sin. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. This is the hope in which we live. This is the hope that we have in the steadfast one, the one who is seated at the right hand with power, the steadfast Messiah who stood in the place of all places where every one of these other people failed, but he succeeded. He stood where we fall. He was steadfast where we fail. He did not get swept up as some sort of victim of circumstances. He wasn't helpless, but he purposed on this mission to redeem a people to himself, a people who did not deserve it. And he was the one who was abandoned by man so we would not be abandoned by God. He was betrayed so that we would be welcome. He was condemned so that we would be justified. He faced wrath so we would receive grace. He endured weakness so that he would empower our endurance. And he did this for the joy set before him. That is the hope of the gospel that we have today. That despite all of our failures, we believe in a faithful Savior. That he is the rock, that he will not go anywhere, that he will not flee or fail, but he will be victorious. And so as we finish up today, ultimately, how will you answer the question, oops, let me go back. I want to say it right, so I don't say, are you the Christ? Because you're not the Christ. Is he the Christ? The Son of the Blessed? How do you respond to that? And so, if you say, I believe, will you trust him today? Will you follow him when everything else screams to run away, that it's too hard, that I can't figure it out, that it's not easy enough, that life is too difficult? Will you trust him that he will carry out his purposes for you that are greater than what you want or you desire or you long for, but his glory is ultimately better than any of your comfort, any of your success, any of those things. His glory is better. It's better for him and it's better for you. Will you trust that that's true? You first answer the question, is he God? The second one, is that true? And will you trust him in your most difficult moment? Will you follow him through the difficulties of life, through the hardest of things, when your own faithfulness will fail, but will you stand up and be like, God, forgive me for failing here? But then he says to you, hey, I know you failed. I know you can't figure it out. I know you can't be as steadfast as I, but I am with you. And this is the exact reason for which he came to die. And so he lifts you then back up in the midst of your failure and goes, go again. But don't go on your own power, but go in mine. And trust me that I am better than your strength, your power, your life. I am better than any suffering that you might try to escape. I will be with you in the midst of it and through it, and you will not just exist, but you will thrive and experience the glory of God forever. So, church, will we trust him today in all seasons, joy or sorrow, testing and victory, fear or hope? And if we do, we will find ultimately that it was worth it, because he is worth it today. So may we trust him, may we follow him, and may we find him, this Jesus who is steadfast for us, better than life itself.